are welcome along to this week's edition of the Huddle Breakdown, where we have a throwback edition with Big Dummy me hosting, and with my friend Alan Morrison in a remote location. I think he's under witness protection program. I don't know what he did, but Alan, I hope you and your family are safe. How's it going?
Yeah, very good. Just paying the price with some sunshine and sangria.
Oh, good. There's no vacationing this time, but no, glad you're having a good time and getting some vitamin D. Laura hopefully will be back next week. She had a last minute thing pop up that was unavoidable, so we'll hopefully see her next week. Quick agenda rundown. We're just going to talk about some of the risks about the transition and managerial position generally. Our thoughts are in that regard. Obviously some of the upside potentially as well. The context of looks increasingly like, although Alan and I are, I think, adopting the we'll believe it when we see it posture of signed, sealed, and delivered. Maybe that's recency bias after the Eddie Howe debacle, but we'll discuss a little bit about the context of Wilfred Nancy in that potential transition. Alan's got a column this week on Kieran Tierney. I think there's a lot of very interesting conversation around Tierney's performances so far this season, and Alan wrote a piece and has an analysis about that. So let's get stuck into it. Alan's on a holiday, and we got the Scotland game coming up here shortly as of the time of this recording, so we're not going to putz around too long. So Alan, let's dive right in. A lot of risk that we talked about entering this season relative to Celtic, given the dynamics of last season of Rodgers, the persistent recruitment issues, kind of the cycle within the squad, external risks as far as what's going on at Hearts and Hibs and Rangers potentially. Some of them are breaking different ways, obviously. So this was a new one, maybe not as expected, but the intra-season managerial shift that's obviously happened. We're going to have two now at this point at a minimum, it looks like. So what are your thoughts on what are some of the important things that fans need to consider, that we're considering as we analyze what's going on, and hopefully the people running the club are considering and thinking about as this change takes place?
Yeah, so I mean, just to recap where we were at the beginning of the season, like you say, there was plenty of risks that we were concerned about, even with Rodgers still in place, mainly due to poor recruitment choices. What I didn't expect certainly was for Rodgers's time to become quite difficult for everybody. It seems. I don't like to use the word toxic. That's kind of a loaded term, but it certainly appeared like everything was not happy in the camp, and for that to sort of manifest quite so quickly. As I'd said a few times as the season progressed, the hope that I had was that the power of the system, the power of the player understanding of the way that Rodgers wanted them to play, especially off the ball, which I know isn't a lot of the time, especially in Scotland, but it's important in terms of game structure, talk about game model. But it was something that was ingrained in the players. And so as long as we had Rodgers, then you at least had a structure that the team knew how to implement. Yes, we were always going to be struggling in the final third. That wasn't down to the way that Rodgers wanted us to play. To be fair to him, it was due to lack of talent in the final third. If you don't have quality footballers in those key attacking areas, you're going to struggle. It's as simple as that. There's no magic. This isn't some arrows, diagrams, flowcharts. This is just very simple. You don't have good enough players to make this work. So, but I thought that the game model would probably be enough just about to get Celtic over the line. So the manager leaves, and then suddenly, not only have we now seen with Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney a shift in game model, a shift in the dynamics of how Celtic play, which manifested itself encouragingly and entertainingly at home to Falkirk and Kilmarnock, and disastrously in Midfield, and got away with it a little bit at Hampden. We're now faced with the prospect of, as you say, another manager coming in who may have yet more indifferent ideas about game models, styles of play, and then how does that really, how do the players that we've got are they fit for that? Can they adapt to it? But really, we're in the middle of a season, so we have to think about the here and now. Celtic isn't a club where you can do what Ajax have done over some years and said, right, we're going to write off the next 2 seasons as we build this next batch of super kids, and then we're going to be glorious, and we'll get to the semi-finals of the Champions League, and then we'll sell them all. That isn't Celtic's model. There would be uproar and sharks and all sorts if that were the case. We have to win in the here and now. That's the reality of it, and that's not an unreasonable expectation, again, given the resource advantage that Celtic has, even with the depleted squad that it's got. So we're in a position where a new manager is going to come in as we enter a period of 11 matches in 38 days, including a cup final, 2 very difficult Europa League matches, and other people may dismiss that, but I'm old school. I believe Celtic should try and win every competition that it's in, so they matter to me, if nobody else. And then we have this run of league games where in a league race that is a race. It's a title race. We cannot discount the bounce that the Rangers may get under Danny Rowe, who's a very good coach, and we cannot, for all we joke about or comment about Derek McInnes, we cannot deny the reality of the gap that there is there, and the possibility that they will actually improve and that they will actually become more coherent than what they have done. So this is genuinely a title challenge. Celtic are not in a great position in it. The injury list is getting worse and worse and worse. There is virtually going to be no time on the grass, as they say, for the coach, whoever it might be, between now and the end of December in terms of training days, and to get any messages across. So if we talk about risk stacked upon risk, that's a pretty bleak outlook, really, in terms of if you were going to come in and try and do anything that was radically different to what the players knew before. That's why I was so, I suppose, critical of Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney and Midtjylland, is that we've got enough going on at the moment, enough things that are not going well. Don't change the fundamental game model, because that's the one thing that works. It's the one thing that we can cling on to that gives us a structure, a way of playing without the ball, a way of defending with the ball that keeps us in games and the players are comfortable. If you throw that out, what is there left? You're asking them to wing it. So that was why that is. But none of that is to say that the prospect of Wilfred Nancy being appointed is something that I'm unhappy with. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that if that is the direction that the club is going, and James, I don't know what WhatsApp rumors and stuff that you're getting, but just to cover that one off, I'm sure you'll have your say. So my view, so I don't know anything, and I'm not in the know on this. I'm just speculating based on public information. Usually try and apply Occam's razor to these sort of situations, is that if this had broken down, I suspect that you'd be hearing very loudly from Nancy's agents and his side of the fence to say, "Hey guys, I'm available." That
Right.
big European move that's on that now is being mooted, I'm up for it. So I don't think that's happened. The most likely thing, well, there's probably two likely things. One that fits into our sort of conspiracy theory view of the world is that the club, so Tisdale, Nicholson et al., have decided Nancy's the man. So he's avoided all of the the poisoned arrows. He's ducked out of the way of the big rolling ball. He's kind of avoided the tarantulas and the snakes, and then he's got to Blofeld and the piranha tank, and he's fallen in. So that's one option. But again, I suspect that isn't the case, because go back to answer A. So answer C, which I think is probably the most likely, is that it seems he's still under contract, and he's under contract until December. So it always comes down to money, and we know Celtic are tight, and we know Celtic are very cautious, and we know that they don't move fast. So it would probably be, again, Occam's razor, that they just don't want to pay that compensation, and therefore there's haggling going on about that, and that's delaying things. And Celtic are quite happy to persist with Maloney and O'Neill until such time as they can pay the minimum amount that they feel they want to pay for Nancy, or even wait till December, my God, and get them for nothing. So I suspect, I just suspect that is, I don't know, it's speculation. I'm just building my own little universe based on the stark facts that are out there in the public domain. But yeah, but long story short, I'd be happy to have him along. And I just wanted to end with a little, because again, people might might think this is some kind of hipster play nonsense. He's got all the kind of the HR vibes in terms of the way that he motivates players and the sexy football and all that. It isn't that. He just seems like a genuinely sensible guy. And I just wanted to a bit I read this morning as I was by the pool. Um, and it's from Sammy Lee. So it's an article by Sid Lowe in the Guardian. You can read this; it's brilliant. Sammy Lee was a Liverpool player in the great Liverpool side of the '80s. One of the sort of workhorses of the team. He did all the running, so that the likes of Dalglish and Souness and all that that kind of stood out a little bit. And Sammy Lee was an England coach at one point. He's quite a well respected coach. He was talking about his approach to coaching. And just wanted to read this out. So he says, so this is Samuel Lee quoting. He says, Bob Paisley would stand at Melwood, one leg cocked on the radiator, watch the 2-lap warm-up, and could tell if someone had an ailment. No kidding. He had a great backroom. Ronnie Moran, Roy Evans, Tom Saunders. I loved them. They were so astute. They coached, but lightly. Football is a simple game, made complicated by people like me, coaches trying to justify our existence. I know coaches who said, I made him. Seriously? The managers I've worked with understood you can overcoach, stifle. In the end, it's about the best players in the best positions. And I just thought, Wilfred Nancy sounds like a great man manager, sounds like a really sensible and interesting football coach. But anyone that comes in at this stage has got to take that approach, got to look at it and keep it simple for the players that are there today to get through this next few months.
I think it's, time clouds our memory and collective memories, individual memories, and then there's always the mythology of collective memory that takes place when kind of outcome bias takes over. And that's why one of the things I was doing as we were entering this season was trying to remind myself first as part of taking some personal pride in trying to be as high quality with the analysis I do as possible, particularly putting it out in the public domain, was the Ange transition. It worked out in the end so well domestically in particular that I think a lot of people, again including myself, had forgot a lot of the nuance of, let's say, the first 6 months of his arrival. And he had a full preseason. He had a really important signing. His preeminent signing came in relatively early in Kyogo in that window. He handpicked that low-hanging fruit from the Japanese league, and we were able to get him over. We couldn't get Matoma. I think that was the other one he was trying to get, if memory serves, who ended up going to Brighton. But so I think, I always talk about what you can control, what you can't control. That season ended up working out really well. But as far as, as late as, late January, prior to the second derby of the season, that league still looked really tenuous, to the point where a lot of Celtic supporters were still kind of bearish about it. And that was with the very fortunate, something we could not control, rescheduling of that, festive period derby because of COVID issues. And if you go back in a time machine and you think about where we were at heading into that game, we had just lost Kyogo. We had just lost Turnbull, who had been flogged along with Tom Rogic as the attacking eights in a 4-3-3 under Ange Postecoglou. Right, the squad was in complete disarray. Sound familiar? Because of terrible injury burden, because of all of the soft tissue problems that were emerging from a lack of depth in squad. So we could have really very easily, in an alternative universe, lost that game, which just that game alone, again, alternate paths of history, would have lost us the league, right? And the league ended up within that margin of error, was that one game. So that's how tight that first season was. And we had a couple of breaks, and you never know in a one-off game. I'm just saying that there's a sequencing of things that take place in these transitions that if everything works out, it all gets papered over. And you kind of forget about how really fraught that was in that 6-month period with someone as talented and as smart and, capable a head coach as Ange was. and it still was within a margin of error where like we just squeaked by kind of thing. And so I wanted to revisit that again because it speaks to what you just mentioned, that you could have the best head coach in the world coming in to this mess, like Ange walked in after that debacle of a 10 in a row season. And you kind of need a little luck too. And you make your own luck at times and that kind of thing. But if luck breaks the other way, so I think no matter who gets hired here, they're walking into a mess. And there's a lot of things that they will not be able to control that could break against us, them and the team and the support and everything else. So I just wanted to revisit that because this was why you and I were so kind of vocal about it over the summer, is that with all of these risks, once they start to feed back on themselves, you kind of lose control to a degree. Like stuff starts to kind of come out of nowhere, like Rodgers departing, and like that's kind of the normal thing when risk starts to manifest. You can't predict the way things are going to go. It's a hard thing about predicting the future. It's uncertain. So once that risk starts to feed back, it gets really rough. So that's why I think he's a good candidate, is because he strikes me like Ange as a resilient individual, a resilient human being. You just look at his biography and what seems to be the nature of his character. You're going to need a tough SOB to walk into this mess, and someone not only from a character perspective, but kind of how they manage football. And that's where I wanted to go to kind of a follow-up and transition into this conversation specifically about Wilfred Nancy and his style of play. My view is that, as you stated, the shift towards what O'Neill and Maloney tried to do at Midfield was way more extreme than what I read as far as Nancy's style of play would be. Yeah. So this is where we get into these kind of alternate futures where I guess if Maloney and Martin O'Neill settle on what we did against Kilmarnock, but it was such kind of a weird game because it's Kilmarnock at home and they were terrible and it wasn't really stress tested at all. So how much of it was reverting to priors versus just an awful opponent not playing well at home? So if they go down the path of more Martin O'Neill like 2005 ball, I see way more risk in that scenario. Not because Martin O'Neill wasn't a great manager, not because Maloney's not potentially a good coach. It's just you make those kind of changes with all of these risks that are going on. To me, that's a really bad idea, as you said. I see even a coach like Nancy, let's say, someone who's I throw him in there somewhere in the corner between like Atalanta and Ange, like that's the section of the tactical universe that I think he kind of populates. That seems closer to me as far as what we were playing than what we tried to pull at Midfield. What do you think about that characterization?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So on the face of it, you sort of think, 3-4-2-1 or whatever, that's the radical, etc. And I think there are elements of it that we need to be concerned about, and we'll touch on. But in terms of, again, use the phrase game model. Again, come back to it's playing the right players in the right positions. And having the best players you can have available to you, have the quality in the team. That's football. Really, if you do those two things, you'll probably win. But such as it is, I don't think it's a radical change. It's still going to be a case of putting verticality in the game, but playing the ball on the ground, not in the air. It's going to be a case of a lot of wide overloads and rotations. That's exactly how we played against under Ange ball. So that aspect of it, in terms of with the ball, I don't think will be particularly different. And again, it seems like he's a aggressive counter presser against the ball. And again, that's exactly how Celtic has played. And the thing that's broken a little bit by O'Neill and Midfield was just the distances, because you're playing this more direct football. You break the connection between the players. You don't have and he seems very much wanting to play what gets classified as more positional. Really, it just means less rigidity in terms of who's in which lane. If you think about the pitch divided into lanes, and more about if we can get 5 guys around the ball and press the hell out of them, we'll get 5 guys around the ball, press the hell out of them. And if we can create an overload by everyone piling onto one side, we'll do that. We might have one guy over there that's then in glorious isolation. So it's a little bit less rigid in terms of positioning, a little bit more fluid in terms of identifying opportunities to create overloads, either in pressing without the ball or obviously with the ball. Again, creating advantages at different parts of the field. So I don't think those aspects are a million miles away from Ange Ball or even what Rodgers was trying to do. It's more, I think, the basic shape. We've not played at the back three. That means that certainly the two wide centre backs. It's a slightly different role, probably. Obviously, we don't play with wing back. Wing back is arguably, certainly physically, maybe the most demanding role on the pitch. It may even be most demanding from a decision-making perspective as well. And then we do play with attacking eights, which I think is analogous at least. And then you're more of a double pivot in midfield, which I don't think is something we're kind of moving towards at the moment. So I think it's probably more the wing backs and the centre backs that and maybe the eights a little bit we need to talk about in terms of what would be different. I know that sounds like half the team, but as I say, I think the basic framework and the basic game model, although the shape is different, isn't a million miles away.
Yeah, and that's as I've looked a little bit more at how Columbus has played, and let's also qualify this, I should say, with he's basically Nancy's only had one major public transition, so he went from Montreal to Columbus. So the idea
James, would you say that's? I was trying to find. I couldn't see on the Opta League thing. I was trying to work out how analogous it was. Ange going from the A League in Australia to the J League, because it seems to me the J League's just a little bit below the MLS. So if you go from the Canadian League to the MLS,
right,
reasonably analogous.
So yeah, I understand the confusion because it's very confusing, or can be. So, because there are 51st state, I know it's very confusing. I say that tongue in cheek to all my Canadian friends as I get my ass kicked next time I go to Toronto.
Fewer than you had. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Tongue in cheek, is the cup that he won at Montreal was in the Canadian National Cup, but Montreal is actually a team in MLS.
Okay.
Right. So it was in the same league. Montreal had been a more resourced club within the context. So really prior to LAFC and Messi coming in, there weren't really any super clubs in MLS. And what I mean by super clubs, teams that spend a lot more money than the other teams, really. Miami has become that because of just the massive amount of money that it took to get Messi in. So their wage bill is actually, I think, somewhere over $50 million now. And LAFC's next, I think, at like 30, 35, something like that. I'm ballparking. Everyone else is kind of squished. And Montreal had been at like the top half of that squish. And now they're way down at the bottom. And that switch happened after he left, after Nancy left. And that was kind of post Thierry Henry. And so they went from kind of a glam model to the owner basically just squeezing money out.
And that's his first job, his first ever appointment as well.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm getting to in a long-winded way, as usual, is I wouldn't automatically just write off that he might not have different ideas coming in to Celtic, because at least based off his public comments that I've listened to, one of the things he talks about is adaptability. And certainly, again, you look at his biography, that makes sense. He's had to have been an adaptable person ever since his childhood, being, as we call it in the U.S., a military brat who had to move around a lot with his father, and I think it was a merchant navy. So what we're talking about here is if we just transport out the Columbus Crew model and move it over, and I think that's a reasonable thought. I actually think that this is very much outside of what seems to be the popular conversation within Celtic fan circles at least online, that I'm reading and hearing. I think our team is pretty well set up for his system, actually, with a couple of very important exclusions to that and exceptions. But this is kind of the whole point. We've been railing on and on for how long now that we didn't have the right players to play the 4-3-3. So it's kind of, we're not, without material work in the next couple of transfer windows, going to get anywhere close to optimization. So like, what's the best you can do under the circumstances kind of thing. And that's by definition going to have some compromises that are going to have to be made. You're going to have some square pegs, round holes to a degree. It's how do you make it better than it was? So that's where I think I hear a lot of conversation about, wow, we don't have the wing backs. I kind of agree, but we've talked a lot about Arne Engels is a guy who could run up and down that right side a lot and whip some crosses in.
Absolutely.
And his physical makeup is kind of close to, the type of wing backs that he's played at Columbus Crew. I mean, more closer to 6 foot, big, athletic, can run a lot, that kind of thing. He's played fullback in his career in Germany, so that kind of fits. The left side, I agree. I don't think there's necessarily a great option there, but I think we can patch it together, whether it's some mix of Srirachi, Inamura, Tanecki. I think that can get patched together. I think the more interesting questions are in that pivot, the double pivot, and then in the back three. So yeah, let's get into that a little bit then. So who do you think would pop in this system? So if he's going to go 3-4-2-1, what would you say would be the players like, wow, this is like tailor made for this? That we don't even need to sign anyone new. These would be like the proverbial new signings, just because they, back to your comment about just get good players and put them in the right roles. That sounds simple, but for some reason, our prior manager didn't seem real great at that, and he hasn't in a lot of his career. So at least that's my assessment of it. So what do you think on that transition?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are options, right? So I think having maybe Scales is generally in a three, your center of the three is your pure defender, and I do think good old Liam Scales, brilliant for Ireland, all that. Put him in the middle, simplify his game again. Don't put the pressure on him having to be that deep playmaker. He's great at defending the box. Let him just be that solid number, effectively the old-fashioned number 5, the stopper. So I'd probably put him in the middle. I think Tierney, we'll come on to Tierney a little bit, written about him this week. I don't think it's reasonable to expect him to be the wing back. I think that's going to be too much stress on his body. But he's played as a left-sided centre back. I'd be happy with Inamura in there as well, actually, with the little that we've seen of him as a secondary. And then if Alistair Johnson got fit, I think again for Canada he's played, I don't know how many caps he's got, 50, 60 caps as that right-sided player. He's got enough physicality about him to play that role, but he's also good enough on the ball and athletic enough to make some runs as well from that deep position. Simpson Pusey may be a good fit in the short term for that right-sided position. I agree with you. I have the advantage that I've already written about this earlier in the season before Rodgers was still here. That this is the kind of shape that I would have gone for. And isn't it funny how it works out maybe? And as I say, Engels would be my favourite for that right-sided role. He's played right on a 4-4-2 for his German club. I think it fits all of his strengths. It takes him away. He'll play mainly with the game in front of him, which I think suits him. Athleticism, pace, power up and down the line. I think it's made for his, as you say, for his physicality as well as the way he plays. I think as the eights, I would say that suggests that's both Nigrin and Balakwisha's kind of sweet spot is that kind of behind the front line, inside right, inside left positions. Tanecki, maybe, I don't know if he could pivot from being an out-and-out winger to being that same sort of role. I wouldn't have a problem with him being that left wing back. I'm not sure that's the best use of him, but I think he would certainly do a job. And again, we're going to have to make compromises somewhere. The really thorny one, I think, is probably the centre of the field. I mean, McGregor's McGregor, I guess you've got to play him, but who do you put in there, given that you're taking Engels out to the right? I think Hatate's brilliant at finding pockets of space, and I suspect Nancy will look at him and Hatate's ability to find little pockets of space around the pitch, and will be impressed by that aspect of his play. Whether he's got the physicality and the power and the strength and the pace to really do that role, and to be that consistently good decision maker about when to press, when to sit, etc. I don't know. We keep coming back to Bernardo, but at some point, I suspect we're going to just to wash our hands and say this isn't going to work. It's done. I guess we're quite close to that inflection point, sadly. So I think that's something. But again, we come back to what you said, which is we're going to. I think there's going to be a multi-phase. This isn't going to be one shot and it's going to be perfect. It's going to be right here. It is now. It's imperfect, but we're going to ask the least number of players possible to be slightly uncomfortable about their roles. Like it has to be. We have to do that. You've then got a January, and given it's MLS close season, you'd think, as you kind of signposted with Ange and Kyogo, you'd think that if Nancy comes in, there's maybe a couple of players that he's thought, right, this is the weaknesses in this squad. I know somebody who can do exactly that role in exactly the way I want them to do. We've never heard of them. And then maybe in January, and given that it's close season there, that's something that can get done maybe. And then from there you slowly start to build.
Yeah, I think again watching more of how Crew played, it's and to bring it back to the spreadsheet shagging community that we are members of, is there's long been dismay might be too strong of a word, but a questioning of the value of a prominent midfielder at Columbus named Darlington Nagbe. And for some of the Celtic fans watching this may remember that name. They had been linked to Celtic many years ago now. I mean, he's in his mid-30s now, but I think when he was in his early 20s, the mid-20s, I think there was some talk, might have been during the Dyla era, of him being a target of Celtic at one point. Terrific, mobile. To me, he's kind of what's the big French midfielder who played at Chelsea? World class cover of space.
Makaleli?
No. Conti.
Well, he's not big. He's a tiny little guy.
Well, that's right. Well, Nagby's not a huge guy either. And he's obviously nowhere near as good as Conti was or is even. Out of sight, out of mind. He's in Saudi Arabia. I forget everything about him now. But it's the same kind of thing where a lot of what he has done at Columbus that I've been able to ascertain just by watching them in the last week or so is that those double pivots, because his system is, and this goes back to the nerd talk about positional versus relational. And I think he's kind of in a hybrid mode from what I've been able to ascertain. And part of that is you'll see his wide center backs just take off sometimes. And I think they have triggers for that, but they have, I think, some freedom as well when they identify these opportunities. So it's the ability for those two double pivots to recognize what their teammates are doing and then to make the adjustments so that when that right center back does fly in and create that wide overload or even underlap and go into the box. I mean, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that I've seen with how his team has played.
Chris Wilder.
Well, exactly. So really, really cool stuff. Like if you're a tactics nerd, which I'm not, I'm kind of becoming one more so. But you've got to have the people in midfield or just generally who are going to then plug those gaps, or else you end up with those massive transition problems, which is a weakness that you're going to have inherently when you have that dynamic of a movement. Well, I think Nagbe, what he's really good at, which is not as easily quantifiable with event data, is he's really smart about when and where to go in order to facilitate his teammates to be able to make these kind of movements. So, and if you watch some of their games, you see him and the other defensive midfielder who switched this season. Last year it was Aiden Morris, I think, who went on. I think he's at Middlesbrough now. He's a young guy. So they've had some, turnover over Nancy's tenure there, but it's almost like a symphony of movement between those two midfielders. So when I think about that context, it's less so about, again, the old kind of stereotypical Scottish slash English. You need a one. You need a Wanyama guy. No, you need a guy who's really, or two guys that are really smart, who are good on the ball and quick and able to cover space. And I think McGregor, I think he's serviceable in that regard. Again, he's not as quick as he was, obviously, but so yeah, it's a question of who's that other guy, and I don't think we have it. I think it'll be lesser evil. I think that would be one of the big things that they'd have to recruit in January to play his system, is kind of my sense. But outside of that, now I will say I don't know about having two left-footed central midfielders, and this is a theoretical comment. But another player who I think profiles to be able to play that role is Inamura. Because again, if you just in what I looked at him in when we signed him in Japan, playing on that awful defensive team, and then the little bit that we saw him over the summer and the friendlies, and then the one game, he looks really intelligent when it comes to moving in space, and he's relatively quick, and he's got good speed, and he's terrific on the ball. So that, to me, kind of, I don't know, he hasn't played central midfield, so it wouldn't be a quick thing. But that's the other thing that Nancy's done so far. As I could tell, I didn't go back to Montreal, but the two center backs that played primarily as his right side and left side were both fullbacks. And then he got his hands on them and turned them into center backs in his back three. And so this is, he's moved guys around based off of profiling and how it's going to fit. Again, the simple stuff that you're talking about. And this is the kind of thing where it looks to me like he's got the, not only the ability to maybe identify and figure some of this stuff out, but it takes a degree of courage to do those kind of moves. You have to have conviction and a bit of a, a toughness, because it's not always going to go well. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have transitions that aren't that smooth. But I'll circle this all back. This is all fertile area for risk, right? So you take that kind of stuff that would be normal inside a transition, and then you throw it into this mess in this pressure cooker, and all of these things could kind of manifest in challenging things where you say, hey, I could see a scenario, and my friend Paul, who I've gotten to know online, runs the Montreal FC Twitter account, Celtic supporter, Scottish, from Glasgow, lived in Canada for many years now. And so he's known Nancy, was not a fan initially of him as a candidate. I don't think he still is. But one of the things he put on Twitter a few days ago was, don't be surprised if Tony Ralston ends up at center back. Right. Yeah. And I, that makes sense, like based off of what I just described and how he's turned, right back and left back into center backs. But my point is, imagine that in a January game, Tony Ralston's your right center back in a back three, and he makes a mistake because he's human. Even if it's going well overall, even if that adjustment turns out to be a good one, and he's actually being a good, productive, backup right center back, let's say behind Poussey, the tolerance and the margin for normal variance and normal error rates is just going to be so pressure cooker that those kind of changes is going to have people's hairs set on fire collectively.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the other reason that I referenced the Sammy Lee thing and that Liverpool side, because people, again, I'm not going to turn this into a kind of It Was What It Was podcast, going over the Liverpool side of the 80s, which is a topic which I can probably bore people for hours. But the point being made there is that we've got an awful lot now, sort of technocrat coaches who have got tactical brilliance and so forth. The point here was that, and bring it back to Nancy. What I've read about Nancy is that, for all that yes, people talk about him being one of the few so-called relationists, and again, I bristle slightly at this labeling in this way, because there's nothing new under the sun in football. Trust me, there's nothing tactically innovative. Really isn't. Everything's been tried before, and it's just different flavors of it. Um, and but what I've read of Nancy is that his great skill is actually his ability to create an environment for humans to perform well. He's a manager of people. Or a leader of people, and this really holds true for any work situation. If you've got somebody that you believe in, and transmits that belief to you, and gets you to believe that you can do things that you maybe didn't think you couldn't, that is the greatest gift you can bestow on anybody. It isn't 3-4-3, it isn't 5-3-2, it isn't 4-4-2. It's the belief that you can do something, even if it might be stretching your previous views on what your capabilities were. And it seems like that is his real strength, his motivation, his ability to lead people, his ability to create a culture. And that's why, that Sammy Lee quote really embodied that. This was a people who created a culture, a winning culture. And I'm not saying it was nice and fluffy. It's not fluffy. It's professional sport. As Sammy Lee found out, he said, I played 67 games. We won the European Cup, and then they signed Steve McMahon, and I was out. That's professional football.
That's
Okay,
life. Yep.
that's what happens. Yeah, that is it. So it's not fluffy, but it's supportive, and it's practical, and it's based around the actual human beings that you have in front of you, and getting the best out of them. And if that's his super strength, it almost doesn't matter whether it's 3-4-3 or a 4-4-2-2 diamond or whatever. If he can just put the right places together, but get the people players to believe, then if you can create that environment and that culture quite quickly, Celtic should still have the greater resources. This Celtic squad, as depleted as it is and as badly put together as it is, well coached, well motivated, with a winning culture and a supportive culture behind it, should still win the league.
Agreed. Fully agreed. And it's back to, and again, I think it's an obvious analog to use, and there are some, some similarities relative to relative unknowns. But what you just described there, I would argue, was part of what made Anne's transition better than it otherwise would have been, i.e. getting Rogic and Turnbull to buy in and to, get fit enough. I mean, the slim, trim, Tom Rogic attacking 8. Probably, I don't know if he'll ever be that fit, skinny again. But I already mentioned Tony Ralston. Tony Ralston was incredible that season, measurably. Like he probably, maybe end up being the best season of his career statistically in a lot of different ways. So I just getting those type of people to really contribute, it's going to have to happen, like, for us to get to where we want to go, given the reality. So let's put a pin in that. I think there's a lot of fertile conversation to circle back. We'll do a lot of this on Extra Time for our subscribers on later in the week, as far as Paul Tisdale, how we've kind of maybe come around to this decision, if this is in fact the direction we're going. Some of the longer term structural issues, we'll get into those more philosophical questions and conversations later in the week. Let's wrap things up for this week. I actually brought this up, so I in our pre-production discussion, so I want to highlight this. This is my idea, because this has been your bailiwick. This has been your specific topic that you've done a lot of really quality work on. Controversial in some circles, as we'll say, but what's going on right now with the referee situation and Willie Collum. I watched his review show last week with Gordon Duncan, and went over the big controversial call, the trustee incident with Butland, the assault charge that should have happened. And I have to say, I watched the clip. I didn't watch the whole show. I watched that specific part of it, and I was like, oh, that makes all total sense now. Like I get how they came about getting to that, to the point where even describing the difference between the keeper having possession of the ball and that, the legacy touching in the head, automatic being a red only was in a certain circumstance. It didn't apply here. It all made full sense once he got through it. And this is above and beyond the issue of the charge on Hatate should have been a red. And like there's a lot of complexity about that game specifically. I don't want to get bogged down into that. What made me want to bring it up again was that I think that regardless of what one thinks about the nuance of the interpretation of the rules of the game, the degree of transparency that's been taking place it's impossible for a good faith person to be critical of that. If someone's actual desire is for officiating to get better, and that for people to be held accountable in their jobs, and the fact that seems to be a very personal movement now to try and get this guy out, I just find, regardless of what school he went to or what his religion is or what team supported as a child, like just on the weight of the public information, how he's conducted himself and what he's done. Again, I'm just saying the spirit of it directionally. Now, I'm not saying about competence necessarily. I just think it's kind of nauseating. So what are your thoughts on that mess? Because I'm the one that's animated a bit about it. So I wanted to just disclose that and tee up.
Yeah, and what you realize when if you as I do, because I like to not just live in an echo chamber, so sometimes do listen to the pods of other teams and so forth. There's a lot of code that goes on, and that code isn't really very subtle. And Willie Collum was a man of Catholic faith, and if it's going to be very disingenuous of anyone to claim that isn't a factor in some of the reaction that's going on. Because I agree with you, Willie Collum was objectively a terrible referee. I mean,
which we said many times.
It was one of these referees which, as a good friend said to me, every single club in Scotland has got a Willie Collum story about how he's done them over, right? And that, I would say he's probably atypical of many of the referees in Scotland, because again, they're part-time refereeing a full-time sport, and that one fundamental truth, I suspect is the cause of attribution for poor performance over any other factor, is they're part-time officials refereeing a full-time sport. You can't get away from that. Okay. The question of why were there certainly statistically significant patterns of assistance during the time that Crawford Allen was in charge of refereeing? As I've said before, I'm not a sociologist, but I'm not an organizational HR expert or a historian or any of those things. But I suspect if you were to look into why did those patterns of assistance exist within that community, again, I think it's a matter of public record. The hostility from the SFA as an organisation towards Celtic specifically, or going back generations, there's a public body of evidence there, and therefore that speaks to potentially a culture that exists within the SFA that is hostile. Now, has Willie Collum solved for that? I suspect not. But what he has done is he's introduced, as you said, a level of transparency through the the VAR review show, through publication of this KMI panel, who are a bunch of football people. They're not referees, so let's be very clear about that. They're not actually technical experts in this field, other than they may have played the game, or they may have reported on the game, or what have you. But again, it's just a level of transparency. But those two things in and of themselves appear to have changed the behaviour of refereeing, such that when we go through a season and a quarter now of the Yorkshire Whistlers reports, not only are the number of issues being referred to him for review, not only is that going down, but the number of errors that he's flagging up is gone down dramatically since Willie Collum took over. And you have to think that there's got to be some correlation there in terms of transparency leading to better behaviour and therefore better outcomes. Now, in the round for all teams in the league, Has refereeing improved? Probably not, because I come back to the first point. Part-time referees and full-time leagues. Until you don't solve for that, you're always going to have a base level of incompetence, I would suggest. What we were concerned about was add on top of a base level of incompetence, a verifiable and statistically significant level of partiality. Now, and that's towards one club. Now, if you remove that partiality because you get called out on a monthly VAR show, then what you're left with is you're just vanilla incompetence, which again infects and disrupts all clubs. Now, that's not great because we want the standard of refereeing to improve, but so long as it's infecting all clubs equally, we can at least I think we can all accept that that's a better outcome than the position that we were in before. And but what the residual impact of that is that if you have a group of people who were used to being looked upon favorably, and not only that, but are harboring nearly 13, 14 years of grudge because their old club was liquidated due to their own management and their own failure to save that club, and all the pain and misery that gets wrapped up in that. And then we're back to quote unquote, a strong Rangers. And then suddenly that lever that you always had, where in tight games you could rely on not getting a penalty given against you, and it appears that that's been taken away from you, then you get the reaction that you're getting today. It's like, what the hell's going on? This isn't the way the world works. The world's never worked this way. What's changed? Oh, the Catholic man. Let's blame him, right? So I think that's part of it. But I also think there's a little bit of, again, they've tried the model of having the Rangers people in charge and them throwing their personal wealth at it, and that's failed. And they've now got the sort of, let's call it the EPL model. It's not really the EPL model, it's wider European football, but especially in England, model of the Yank hedge fund or the Yank investors, whatever you want to call them. That'll save the club. And the early signs are they don't care. They're not involved day to day, and they've put a bunch of idiots in charge. That's the early evidence. That could be proven wrong in time. They've been smart in hiring Danny Rule, I'll give them that. But they've recruited a lot of bad players, and they've got some dodgy-looking execs in charge running it day to day. And if you've come from this journey that they've been on of liquidation, losing your club, having to start a new club, working your way up, all of the pain and disappointment and probably guilt about why the old club died in the first place, but we don't talk about that, and all that. And then you get to this potential panacea of new ownership, 49ers sounds sexy, billions of dollars, tech, smarts, Leeds United, EPL, Red Bull, all sounds amazing, doesn't it? And you put that in front of somebody, and then, quarter of the way through the season, it's like, oh shit, this doesn't look very good either. You're going to lash out. And this is a fan base that's renowned for lashing out anyway. And again, Willie Collum is in the firing line because, it's an appalling vista, as they say, to think that after all of this and then the new investment, that they could actually be worse off than what they were before. So again, it's lashing out, and Willie Collum is the lightning rod for that. But he should be commended. I don't think he's necessarily raised the standards of refereeing, but I think he's fighting an uphill battle in that regard because of the part-time refs. But at least now we're all victims to the same degree. At least it's fair incompetence.
Well, and that's the thing. And just because of our normal emotional and irrational monkey brains, souped up monkey brains, we're the Ferrari of monkey brains. We humans, those poor monkeys, only have civics. But you're automatically, it's always going to be like this never-ending blaming of the refs. The refereeing decisions is always like the go-to. Moaning for fans. I do it too. I mean, everyone does it across the different sports that I'm a fan. It's perpetual. But the red flag for me was, again, that even in the furor after the review show, I didn't see a single person put together a cogent argument within the rules of the game to say what he explained, because he explained it like to an idiot, because I am, when it comes to the laws of the game. Like, oh, that's obvious. Like, clearly now that makes sense. And I didn't see a single person say, well, no, he got that wrong.
Yes.
And the reason why, now again, I think it's reasonable for people to say, well, that's a dumb rule. They need to change that rule. If you kick someone in the head, no matter how hard, if it's the side of the foot or not, whether there's intent or not, if you make contact with a keeper's head with your foot, period, it should be a red card. That's a perspective. I'm not going to argue with it necessarily. I mean, I think it's a reasonable one to have. That's not the rule right now. Right? So you can't make up rules on the fly. And again, I think it's easy to forget early in this process, he did a review show after the cup final that Celtic, I think you could reasonably argue, won a cup because of a royal screw up, not only on the pitch, but in the VAR room. And he called it out and filleted them in public in direct contrast for what, the upper, and why? Because he was following the rules of the game. Right. So this is the point. Like if you follow truth, if you're actually trying to do, I'm not saying he hasn't made mistakes even in the review show. I don't know. I don't analyze it forensically, and I wouldn't know even if I did, because I don't know the rules of the game that well. But I mean, to me, to try and undermine what is being done, forget about the individual, but the idea of doing this review and actually being transparent about it. To anytime people are saying get rid of the transparency, it's like that's where, in the dark corners, it's when things occur that the light of day is hopefully there to clean.
It's utterly remarkable that for 14 days the Scottish mainstream media have failed to find another referee that can explain the rules as they're written and as they were implemented, and it perfectly
like Collum did.
Like Collum did. I asked one English referee, the Yorkshire Whistler, and he said exactly the same thing as Willie Collum, and it's on there on the site, and you can read it, right? And I suspect there was plenty of other referees who don't have a history of refereeing in Scotland that you could have asked for it to be explained to you why this happened, and because it to me it's nonsensical as an incident to pick on, because
right.
It's such a it's not a non-incident.
The last one that was this fun.
Trustee was reckless and stupid, and I accept that. But the right outcome was got for the right reasons in law. Other than that, it's utterly ludicrous. And therefore, I come back to, well, what's the reason? And the reason is the cultural stuff and the contextual stuff that I've laid out.
The other one that immediately comes to my mind, it was as ridiculous to use as a bludgeon.
The Alistair Johnson handball.
Yeah,
Alistair Johnson.
Yeah, it's like
it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts, isn't it?
But this
again,
is
same thing.
This reaches that same level.
How do we not deal with the pain of losing a derby at Celtic Park? I know. Let's pretend that a handball that happened after an offside is some major conspiracy. It's just nuts.
And again, I think the nuts part of it, I get. That's the part I get. Like that, our supporters do it. We all do it. Yeah, people fly off. It's the duration of it. It's the lack of adult conversation amongst the expert class, i.e.
It's the duration of it, and it's the media compliance in going with that narrative.
And then it's going after Collum as an individual. That's the part that sent me. I'm like, this is, come on. So once those things escalate to the point now where they're coming after Collum, that's why I wanted to bring it up again. So anyway, thank you. We put an hour in, wasted a whole hour of your holiday. You got to go get about about 6 pints in you now, because it's dinner time.
Oh, no, I'm off to watch. I know by the time this comes out, it'll be over, but I'm off to watch the Scotland-Denmark game. So I'll just say this for the younger. I think we have some younger viewers. I'm fortunate enough to be old enough to have seen Scotland qualify for a number of World Cups, and I'm just saying this pre-game is that if Scotland don't make it, don't worry, because whenever we get to the World Cup, it's terrible.
Hey, coming to the US, we can have fun. I'll host some people. We'll have a pool party. How about that? But no, so I saw the team sheet when it got released. So Lyndon Dykes in it at striker. So right. So so
we'll
we'll wrap
it up. Could be the guy that can't run.
Well, right. So we'll wrap it up with this because I just couldn't believe it. So there was such a dichotomy between the Ireland win, where Liam Scales was justifiably and is justifiably held out as a hero, and then the Scotland game on Saturday, when both teams needed a goal. Both managers went with the tried and tested strategy: just throw all your strikers on the pitch because you need a goal. And it worked for Ireland, but I thought there was a chasm strategically why it was dumb for Clark to do it and why it made sense for Ireland to do it was because Scotland actually had control of that game to a large degree before he did that, meaning that, McGinn and Chris, I mean, they were playing good football and really putting the pressure on Greece, because Greece isn't that very, didn't seem to me anyway to be that good defensively. So I like to go to the just shell it and hope and get it in the box type of, like, you were actually playing better than they were. I don't know why you let them off the hook that way. Whereas, Ireland was playing probably a better team that were playing better, and they needed to introduce chaos, and they did a hell of a great job doing it. And it worked out for them. So it seems to me that this is and it might work. I hope it works. But Craig Gordon in goal, Lyndon Dykes at striker.
Who are the centre backs?
Well, he did bring in McKenna in for Hanley. So Suter and McKenna.
Just one change.
Yeah.
I'd put Tierney in at centre back. McKenna and Tierney.
Two lefties. You can't do that.
Somewhere Enda will be having a fit.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. Go Scotland and go Ireland in March. I'm hoping that all of my friends in the Isles in Ireland will come over to the World Cup in the US, and so you can sweat your ass off in July and freaking in most of the United States. So anyway. Well, speaking of sweating your ass off, Alan, thank you for taking time out. Enjoy your island life, and we will be back on the Extra Time show for subscribers with Martin later in the week. Take care, everybody.